Welcome to Semantics and Pragmatics. Semantics is the architecture of meaning. Pragmatics deals with how context is in text. The objectives for this section recognize the important difference between grammaticality and felicitousness. Second, recognize that pragmatic knowledge is encoded in culture and therefore it needs to be made explicit to learners. Then we'll identify major relationships between different kinds of words and the source of its ambiguity. Finally, we will recognize context as a major influence in meaning. In the book The Meaning of Meanings, 1923, Ogden and Richards distinguished between 16 different meanings of the word mean or meaning. The importance of semantics is the study in which the way words and sentences convey meaning in everyday situations in speech and in writing. As you can see here in these examples, meaning, even the word meaning, is not as easy as it is supposed to be. Let's take a look about semantic relationships. At the word level, what is a word that has the same meaning of another word? What is a word that has the opposite meaning of another word? You should know about these. What about a word that sounds the same and it's spelled differently and the meaning is different too? For example, two, and two. Yeah, we're talking about synonyms, antonyms, and homophones. However, there are more relationships than these. For example, how do you call a word that has the same spelling and pronunciation but unrelated meaning? For example, table and ball. Ball, as in the case of a round object you play with, and a ball, as in a party. What about the next one? A general class word that includes other type related words within a type of relationships. For example, bird, eagle, hummingbird. This is bird would be a general class word that includes other kind of birds. Finally, what about the capacity for a single word or phrase to have multiple related meanings? For example, figure. You can talk about a figure as in figure skating, but you could also talk a figure as in a figure in math or a figure of speech. Certainly, this is a capacity for a single word or phrase to have multiple related meanings. So if you take a look at the first one, the word that has the same spelling and pronunciation but unrelated meaning, and the third one, the capacity for a single word or phrase to have multiple related meanings. So here we're talking about homonyms, so same name but unrelated meaning. Hyponyms that are a general type of, like bird, eagle, hummingbird, and polysemy, the capacity for a single word or phrase to have multiple and related meanings. Let's take a look at this in context at the word level. So if we look at these outrageous headlines, this is funny because of what kind of word relationship? Homonyms. A homonym is a word that has the same spelling and pronunciation but completely unrelated meaning. What about this? This one is also a homonym. Again, a word that has the same spelling and pronunciation but unrelated meaning. In this case, the word make. Finally, we can take a look at this one. And this is polysemy, the capacity for a single word or phrase to have multiple related meanings. Let's take a look at other word relationships. Yeah, this is polysemy. Again, a word that has multiple meanings but related meanings. If I say missing baby found in sandwich, there must be something wrong with that. Well, except that in this case there are homonyms because these are words that have the same spelling and pronunciation but completely unrelated meanings. So the sandwich that you usually think about is not the sandwich in Cape Cod in eastern Massachusetts. So when you treat sandwich as a place, then it becomes easy to understand. There's something about ambiguity in semantics and syntax as well. And now we're talking about noun phrases and verb phrases and how we read these phrases. So the first one is McDonald's fries, the holy grail for potato farmers. If you consider um, fries as a verb phrase, then this doesn't make any sense. How come McDonald is frying, the act of frying the holy grail? That doesn't make any sense. But if we're talking about um, treating McDonald's fries, in which fries is the head noun, fries like potato fries, then and McDonald's is the pre-modifier, then it is easy to say, that basically fries for McDonald's are very, very important. What about this one? If we treat as a verb phrase, then that's when the ambiguity comes. But if we treat Lady Jacks as the name of a team, then that doesn't happen. Word meanings are also defined by individual and cultural experiences. In this case, for example, this is not fun anymore. Cash reward to be offered whenever a cop is shot. It could be understood in different ways. For the individual criminal, this could be an opportunity. But for the rest of us, for most of us, this is that is very bad. And what about other experiences here? The word press, the Associated Press, reported on the same report at the time of Katrina in very, very different ways. As you could see, they could be seen to be doing the same exact action, and yet one is portrayed in a very negative way, and the other two are portrayed in a positive way. So the words that we use matter, and they matter profoundly. Part of culture is the context in which texts are embedded. So, pragmatics is the study of the systematic relationships between language and context. In communication, there are two important things to take into consideration. First is the intention of the message, and second is the reception of the message. Pragmatics studies the difference or concordance between the intention of the message and the reception of the message. Most of the time, when we intend something, it is received as that we intended. However, many times what we say or do might be interpreted differently. We might have not intended it that way, but it was received that way. That's what pragmatics studies. And also studies grammaticality and felicity. Whether a sentence is grammatical is a semi-independent question as to when it can be used. A sentence is grammatical if it can be used in some context, but it is felicitous only if it is used in the proper context. So you could have a sentence that is completely grammatical but completely inappropriate in terms of felicitousness. So pragmatics is concerned with the system underlying what makes an utterance or a text felicitous. Let me give you some examples. Analyzing this sentence in grammatical terms only is highly inappropriate and irrelevant. It doesn't matter if it is grammatical, it is completely inappropriate. It is not felicitous, as you can see. Even though these texts are grammatical, they actually violate both the maxim of relevance and quality. Both of these state the obvious and lack actual basis. New research says research is valuable, researchers glad. That doesn't say anything. The other one, statistics show that tick pregnancy drops off significantly after age 25. Really? Again, there are maxims in communication. We communicate to intent. We communicate to say something that is relevant and that is of quality. These two violate those maxims. Although grammatical, this announcement violates the maxim of quality, as the spelling mistake itself disqualifies not only the supposed authority of the messenger, but undermines the central message. If you're going to attack immigration or other people because they don't speak English or they don't speak English the way they're supposed to be doing it, at least check your spelling. One of the important things that needs to be taken into consideration in terms of culture is how texts are structured. So, for example, in a recipe book, we should expect a lot of recipes, and recipes usually don't have a subject. Pour 3/4 of sugar, um, stir constantly, etc. So we actually have also not only language that we expect, like imperatives, meaning sentences without subjects, as I just described, but also we expect to see a logical progression of the ingredients. For example, first the ingredients that you need, and then later on the procedure. The procedure needs to be in logical order. For example, you cannot drop the eggs before opening them. It's all only logical. In this academic journal in science, for example, we would expect a very different kind of genre or texts that appears. And for example, in this case, the semantic relations, they might trigger different contexts. So we need to be conscious of the fact that in a recipe book, for example, we would expect genres that are consistent with that purpose of instructing someone how to do something. In the other one, in a science journal, for example, we expect a lot of research and therefore different ways of organizing text. For example, you won't find some words like once upon a time or suddenly in any of these contexts. English language learners need to know that, and they need exposure to all this. There's a specific social purpose, generic structure, and language features of different genres. For example, as you can see here, recounts, the social purpose is to retell, and the generic structure of recounts, of good recounts, are they begin with an orientation, they continue with a sequence of events, and they continue with a reorientation of personal comment. We have language features, adverbials of time, action verbs, and usually is in past tense. This is very different from procedures or explanations or information reports or exposition, etc. These need to be explicitly taught to students, and also they depend on the culture in which they are deployed. We will be talking a lot more about this in the genre lecture. In terms of cross-cultural contexts, we have something called contrastive rhetoric, and basically, in a nutshell, what this means is that cultures differ considerably in their modes of constructing text. As you can see here in these diagrams, English is very straightforward. English, in a way, they tell you, you say what you're gonna say it, and then repeat what you just said, and you go straight to the point. In Semitic languages, Oriental languages, Romance languages, or Russian, it is actually very different. Oriental languages, for example, never touch the subject directly. They are very reader dependent. What that means is that they depend on the reader to fill in a lot of the details and a lot of the ideas that the author, the writer, is trying to convey. In English, as opposed to um, Asian languages, English is very direct, as I was telling you, and as direct, it is also very writer dependent. A text is clear or not based on the writer, based on how it is written. If the text is not comprehensible by readers, it's not the fault of the reader, it's the fault of the writer, as opposed to in Asian languages. Romance languages are kind of, they begin on a specific topic and they could deviate, and then they may go into a tangent, and then they can continue, and this is how the progression continues. Kaplan 1966, for example, to talk a little bit more about Asian languages, suggested that Anglo-European expository essays follow a linear development, like in English, whereas Chinese, for example, the paragraph development may be said to be turning and turning in a winding gyre. The circles of gyres turn around the subject and show it from a variety of tangential views, but the subject is never looked at directly. So this is what we're talking about. So basically, the important thing in this section is to understand that context plays a central role in understanding any text. Let me give you an example. Stop the video and read this. Okay, my question is, what is this about? Let me ask you, why is this text so dark? Do you understand every single word here? That's not the problem. The problem is not at the level of words or at the level of understanding of sentences, but at the level of understanding of context. What is this about? Now, if I give you one single word and then I ask you to read it again, you will be able to read it in a very different light. Okay, the word is laundry. This is about laundry. Then you go and read, and every single sentence and every single word falls into place, not because you now magically know something more about every single word or every single sentence, but because you have a greater sense of context. This exercise explains why is it so important for ELLs to know the context in general. Learning goes from whole to part, and when they know what you're talking about, they can fill in the details much easier. But when they have no idea what you're talking about in general, you could be talking all day and everything is going to be obscure, as this passage used to be for you. Do we read individual words or whole words? Take a look at this and try to read it. Stop it. Stop the video and look at it. Now, arguably, there's not such research in Cambridge University, and this is not really a research. What says there is not really true. However, it says something very specific about how our brain works and how we are able to read this without any problem. The same situation is with the following slide. Try to see if you can read it. If you have some proficiency in Spanish, you will be able to read this. I can read it very easily. Start with me and take a look. Cierto día de verano, estaba en la playa observando a dos chicas brincando en la arena. Estaban trabajando mucho construyendo un castillo de arena con torres, pasadizos ocultos y puentes. As you can see, I am very fluent in this. You could try to do the same, but certainly you will have a harder time with this one than with the previous one in English if you don't know any Spanish. Our perception of words depends on the orthographic environment in which we encounter the letters. I want you to please read out loud these two sentences that you see there. Now I want you to pay specific attention to the following, to these words, these two words, okay? These two words were read by you in a very different way. They are completely different words because of the context, but yet when you see them as individual words, they are very, very, very similar, almost identical. So this tells us that our perception of words depends on the orthographic environment in which we encounter the letters. Word level perceptions affect letter level perceptions. In fact, characters often can be interpreted only with reference to their context. Other results that appear to call for this same conclusion are, for example, that more letters can be apprehended per unit time when a word is presented than when a string of unrelated letters is presented. A letter string formed either by deleting a letter of a word or replacing one or two of the letters of the word is often clearly perceived as the original word. This is a lot of research with reading and reading perception. Our perception of words depends on the semantic environment in which we encounter the words. As you can see here, the process of comprehension involves not just understanding what one has read. So it's not just understanding what you just read, but anticipating what one will read. We are doing not only, when we read, we're not only looking back at what we just read and understanding, but we're also at the same time and simultaneously anticipating what we will be reading. To see this, one has only to throw an anomalous word onto the end on an otherwise cohesive and predictable ketchup. As you can see, this illustrates the point very well. So what are the conclusions for this? Well, language knowledge includes a sophisticated knowledge of language use, that is called pragmatics, and aspects of which differ from languages to languages, an aspect of language knowledge which seems to be just as important as grammatical knowledge. So it is very, very important to think about grammaticality, but it's also as important and almost even more important to think about felicitousness. In other words, the fact that they make sense, that whatever is said or written not only grammatical, not only is grammatical, but also that makes sense in that context, that is appropriate. And also, it appears that form is often acquired prior to function. That is, acquiring the pragmatic knowledge is sometimes very, very slower. if you know another language, you know that the last thing to really gather from the other language is the sense of humor, is jokes. This is very, very difficult because jokes and humor embed culture into it.